Hello and welcome to REBOOT, the missing link to productivity and performance. I'm Jo Lichten, a PhD nutritionist and registered dietitian who's been fascinated with how the human body works to create energy. Energy which helps us to think, act a certain way, and feel. I wish I could welcome you to Florida. I do live in Florida. Florida, as you know, is known for its warm winter weather, Mickey Mouse, and palm trees. Unfortunately, while I live in Florida, it's about 3 hours north of Orlando. We don't have any of that. No Mickey Mouse. We freeze in the winter, and we have way more pine trees than palm trees. In fact, we have so many pine trees that we don't have just one paper mill, we have two. My son-in-law works in the maintenance department of one of them, doing what's called vibration analysis. Do you know what that is? I didn't know either. So when I found that out, I asked him, what does that mean? And he answered it this way. You know how when an engine operates, it vibrates? And I'm thinking, yeah, sure. I mean, we've all opened the hood of our cars and we notice that the engine shakes a little bit when we operate. And he said, well, you know, the machines at the paper mill are huge. I mean, many stories high, and they also vibrate, and even more. And over time, all that vibration causes nuts and bolts to loosen. The looser they get, the more the engine vibrates, and over time, it could blow. And so my job is to check the vibration level of those machines, and when it gets to a specific level, we shut them down for maintenance. So this is absolutely critical, because if those machines blow, they not only cause shutdown of the machine, which could cost a lot of money in production losses, but it can also cause injury and even death of some of the operators. So perhaps you're thinking right now, well, what does a paper mill have to do with the operating room? I'm glad you asked, because there is a reason. Because those machines in the operating room have to be maintained very much like those machines in the paper mill. Because if they're not well maintained, it can create errors that can cause injury and even death. I'm guessing your facility, the manufacturer, has rigorous schedules to make sure that those updates are done in a timely manner, right? But what about the people that operate those machines? Like you. Have you ever thought about how you should be maintained? See, the human body is no different than those machines at the paper mill. If we don't manage our fatigue or our energy, two ends of the same spectrum, whether we're talking about physical fatigue, mental fatigue, compassion fatigue, it doesn't really matter. It could negatively affect our mental and emotional processing, leading to errors, accidents, and even death. Now, I'm sure you've all heard the statistics about medical errors and accidents, and I realize they don't all happen in the operating room, but I think we can agree there's too many incidences. I am not a nurse. I do not work in an operating room. I am a registered dietitian. While I've worked in hospitals, yes, I've worked in universities, I've worked for major corporations like Johnson & Johnson. I did, in preparation for this program, speak to a number of people in length who work in operating rooms, nurses, directors. I spoke with people who work with some of those machines in the operating room that are oftentimes there to help the doctor with those machines. So I have some idea of what goes on. Many of them talked about the whole idea of controlled chaos, and how many different pieces there are to pull together. And I can't even imagine. But what I can share with you is my knowledge of energy management or fatigue management, because I've been studying it since the early 1990s and speaking on this topic. My latest book, REBOOT, is about how to power up that energy. And I went through the literature and garnered so much information as to how we can power up our own energy. This is not foo-foo. This is based in the science. These are all medical research studies that I'm pulling the information from in this presentation, my hope is just to enlighten you about some slight changes in the way that we live our lives and how slight changes can help our performance on the job, including our clarity of thought, speed, accuracy, and even our mood. When people think about fatigue, they oftentimes think about sleep or lack thereof. But in researching my book, Reboot, and looking at thousands of medical articles, I found that it goes much broader than that. And you're going to see some of the references in your handout. But I found that fatigue can be improved or reduced, I should say, through small shifts in the way that we eat, sleep, move, and think, helping us to sustain concentration, focus, stamina, so we can improve productivity, prevent burnout, make the environment safer, make us healthier. So here you go. Here are the objectives for the next hour. I'll be happy to know that this is not a boring PowerPoint presentation. My plan, if we had been together in Orlando, was to use a software called Menti or Mentimeter, in which you're able to answer on your phone and we can see all the results on the screen. It is so cool, but we're not in Orlando. This isn't live. So we're going to do the next best thing. Every 3 to 4 minutes, I'm going to ask you a question. You'll see the question right here on the screen. I want you to answer in the chat box. You'll have just 15 seconds to do so. I'm going to be in the chat box. I'm going to be looking at your responses, be able to answer your questions on the spot. And then we'll debrief. I've done this presentation so many times that I have a feel of how you're going to answer. And so I'll debrief it according to how I've experienced in other presentations. And then we'll move on to the next question. So it's really quick. Through this quiz style format, I think you'll stay focused on the program, you'll learn the information and have more fun in the process. So you ready for your first question? Okay, let's imagine you have something important you have to get to. It's like first thing in the morning. So you get up early, you're rushing around, you're dashing out the door, you get in the car and you think, I'm going to make it as long as everything goes smoothly. If the traffic is okay, the weather is okay, but all of a sudden you turn on the ignition and the fuel light comes on. So what are you going to do? Well, I hope none of you answered D. I mean, you're not going to go back to bed, right? This was something really important you had to do. Did you answer A? Just drive? It's good to have a positive attitude, but let's face it, positivity is not going to fuel the car. Think you'll gas up later? But come on, what if there's no gas station there? Has that ever happened to you? Obviously, the answer is C. You got to put some fuel in your car. You might be a few minutes late, but at least you're going to make it. Now, what does this question have to do with human performance and how we operate in the operating room? Well, it turns out lots. Well, see, if you answer D, just go back to bed. I mean, it's like saying, well, there's nothing I can do about my own personal energy, but that isn't true. There's lots we can do. If you answered A, you're thinking, well, having a positive attitude is good, isn't it? Well, yeah, but again, it's not real fuel for the body. Positivity is great, don't get me wrong. If you answered B, drive as far as you can go, well, I think this is probably the biggest problem that I see with fueling the human body. People go all day long without eating and then eat all of their food in the evening hours. It just doesn't make sense. The car doesn't work that way, and neither do we. So we want to put some fuel into our tank, but let me ask you the next question. Where do we get our energy in the first place? Is it from the way we eat, sleep, move, think, or all of the above? Go ahead, take a guess. Okay, perhaps I tricked you there because I mentioned all those words, and so some of you might have written all of the above. And let's face it, all of the above can affect how we think, how we perform, how we feel. But I asked you, where do we get our energy? And energy comes from the foods that we eat. Yeah, we eat the food, it breaks down to small little pieces, and then it goes out into the cells and creates energy, or ATP. In fact, other than dietitians, we don't typically think about this. We think of calories as being a bad thing, but have you ever looked that up in the dictionary? Calories are a measurement of energy. So in other words, we have to eat to get energy. I mean, think about a time in which you didn't eat enough. How did you feel? How did you perform? This leads to my next question. What about black coffee or tea? Did they give us energy? What do you think? Yes or no? Well, thinking, well, of course, caffeine gives me energy. Well, it does make you feel energized. It's a stimulant drug, but it can't really give you energy, right? Because we said that, calories are a measurement of energy, and basically caffeine has no calories, so it has no energy. Just makes you feel like you have energy, but it's not true, real energy. And your cells need fuel just like the car needs gas. So, by the way, adrenaline, stress, yeah, that makes you feel energized as well. It gives you that burst of energy, but it's not real energy either, right? Okay, now since calories give us energy, does eating more give you more energy? What do you think? Yes or no? All right, some of you are thinking, well, no, eating more just makes me feel sleepy afterwards. And it's true. A large meal oftentimes doesn't make you feel energized. You feel like just sitting on the couch and not being very productive. But here's the thing. You didn't feel energized, but yeah, you got energy. Because remember, energy is a measurement of calories. And you added in the calories right there on the belly, right? So here's your next question. What type of diet do you think is recommended to create lasting energy? A low carbohydrate diet? A high carbohydrate diet? What about intermittent fasting, where you eat within a narrow 8-hour window? Or none of the above? What do you think? All right, well, this is a little bit more complicated to answer because I think all of you can say, well, that one works for me. And I think most of the time when people say, well, that one works for me, they're thinking about how it helps them to maintain their weight, perhaps. But when you look at the literature as to how the human body is fueled, you find that it really does well with a more balanced approach. In terms of energy. In fact, if you look into the literature of sports nutrition, where you are really focusing on performance, most of those athletes eat a higher carbohydrate diet. Now, I'm not recommending you go high carbs. I'm not saying that going lower carb is out either, because you know what? No one perfect formula works for everyone, but you have to realize that you have to fuel your body when it needs the fuel. Just like your car needs more fuel to climb a hill and less when it's just idling. Well, it's the same with human beings. We need more fuel when we're the most active. If we overeat when we're not very active, we don't feel energized. We just collect more fat stores around the middle. So since I said that it's important to eat when we're the most active, let's talk about a period of time where we're the least active, like when we're sleeping. So here's your next question. When you're sleeping or just laying there at rest, how many calories do you burn compared to what you're burning when you're even just sitting at your desk? What do you think? Go ahead. Answer in the chat box. Do you know the answer is 80%? Right? Doesn't that blow your mind? Like thinking, wow, really? Yeah. See, people think that we like burn a lot of calories when we're exercising, and a whole lot less when we're sitting and like nothing when we're sleeping, but it isn't. I mean, when we're sleeping and when we're sitting at our desk, the calories aren't a whole lot different. Yeah, a little bit, 80% of it. And that's because most of the calories we burn in a day are just to keep us alive, for our heart to beat, to circulate our blood, our lungs to breathe, for our brain to coordinate all of that. So often I hear people say, well, I don't need to eat breakfast because all I did was sleep. Well, for those of you who maybe have a Fitbit, have you ever noticed when you wake up in the morning, it says that you burned, say, 400 calories, and you're like, how did I do that? Now, mind you, they're talking about since midnight. They're not talking about your whole night's sleep, right? Because midnight is when the new day started. And you're thinking, there's something wrong with my watch. All I did was sleep. Well, no, it's correct. You were burning calories because you were alive. So often I have people tell me, well, I don't eat much at work either because all I'm doing is sitting at my desk. Well, but same thing. Yeah, you're staying alive. So we're burning kind of a level amount of calories all throughout the day. In other words, we want to fuel our body throughout the day, not like a whole lot of calories at one time. And yet, this is what I see in almost every work environment. We eat very little breakfast, a smaller lunch, maybe we skip it. We eat all of our calories in the evening. We wonder why our performance, our energy is just not where we want it to be. You need food to fuel your body, not just for movement, but we need it for mental activities, to focus, to concentrate, to brainstorm, to stay emotionally calm, balanced, to be able to manage the stress in our life, to perform at work, reduce errors and accidents. And I think a more balanced approach is best when it comes to performance. I know this sounds very simplistic, but frankly, the research supports that a balanced approach is where you get lasting energy throughout the day. Have you ever noticed when you eat a high carb breakfast that you're sleeping like an hour or two later? Right? Carbohydrates don't give us lasting energy. That's where the protein comes in. Research studies have shown that people perform better with a higher protein breakfast. True at every other meal, but I think breakfast is where we really notice it. When you eat maybe some eggs or some Greek yogurt, you find that you have more lasting energy for 3, 4, maybe even 5 hours. But it's also important to have fruits and veggies, grains, simply because they're rich in carbohydrates, which I know people are really kind of scared of. But carbohydrates turns into glucose, which fuels the brain. Carbohydrates have nutrients you just can't find in protein foods. And we're going to get back to that in a little bit. Let me go back to the beginning, kind of summarize a few of these things, add in a few more details, and then we'll go into the chat box, give you a few minutes to ask some questions about that, and we'll move into the next section of the program. So first of all, what we talked about is the importance of thinking about food as fuel. And I'll tell you, when I'm working with small groups about thinking about food as fuel, I'll tell you, like light goes on in some of these people's heads where they don't realize that. They go all day without eating, and then they get home and they stuff their face with food, and they're saying, I've got a psychological problem. I just overeat in the evening. And it's like, no, that's not a psychological problem. That's a physiological problem. When you go all day without eating, well, guess what? Your body says enough, and you end up overeating. So just start thinking about food as fuel and realizing, yes, the way we sleep, the way we move, the way we think can energize us, but we need fuel, much like the cars in our driveway need some sort of fuel to make them go. We also mentioned that black coffee and black tea are stimulant drugs. So while they might make you feel a little bit more alert and perky, they don't give you energy. So don't forget to have some breakfast along with the black coffee and black tea. And you know what? In fact, I've got another question for you about all of this caffeine. The research shows that a specific range of caffeine is good to increase focus and attention, because that's what caffeine is for, to increase focus and attention. The research shows that what amount is appropriate for this? Go ahead and answer in the chat box. What is your best guess? Well, I think you'd be surprised to find out that most research studies, by the way, that are done with people who drink caffeine, not people that are teetotalers, but people that are drinking caffeine, they've found out that all it takes is 50 to 100 milligrams of caffeine to increase focus and attention, and that greater amounts at one time can actually increase nervousness and take away from that focus and attention. Now, some of you are thinking, no, this doesn't work for me. I know I need way more caffeine than that, because 50 to 100 milligrams of caffeine is a very small cup of coffee. In fact, a venti at Starbucks has 400 milligrams of caffeine. So maybe you're thinking, well, I definitely need more caffeine. No, my guess is you probably need more sleep. But in addition, I think in many cases, have you ever used the bathroom first thing in the morning and looked in the toilet? What color is that pee? It's bright yellow. And what does that indicate? You're dehydrated. Well, do you know that dehydration can make you drink a little bit more caffeine? Not because you need the caffeine, but because you're dehydrated. And so think about that. What if you were to drink a glass of water before that cup of caffeine? Would that help you to feel, better? Because did you know that dehydration can make us feel bad? I mean, it can depress our mood. It can slow our performance and our speed, our accuracy, can bring on headaches. We know this from research from athletes, but more recently, we found that a small amount of dehydration can affect your performance on for the regular people that are not athletes. You want to guess what that amount is? Go ahead, answer in the chat box. Yeah, it's just 1% dehydration has been shown to decrease your performance, your mood, your speed, your accuracy. And a lot of these tests were done with like computer skills and so forth. So again, think about that cup of coffee in the morning. Is it really the cup of coffee that you need, or are you dehydrated? Would it help to have some water? Oh, sure, go ahead and have the caffeine. I like my Diet Coke in the morning, but realize that maybe less would be better. In other words, less coffee, tea, whatever at one time, maybe even spread it out through the morning, have a dose in the morning, first thing, a dose mid-morning, a dose at lunch. I like to think of caffeine as a little bit more medicinal because it does help with focus and attention, might even help you with that mid-afternoon slump, but your body might perform better with small amounts throughout the day rather than a big gulp, not the brand, first thing in the morning. So that kind of covers the whole idea about caffeine and remembering that it's not energy. It is just a stimulant drug. We also talked about how eating more at one time does give you energy. It just doesn't give you, energetic energy, but it gives you stored energy. Probably not what you want. And that's one of the reasons why it's kind of critical to match your eating with your expenditure. Because let's face it, once you accumulate stored fat, it's hard to get rid of it. And with studies with athletes, they've shown that they perform better when they kind of match that energy in and energy out at the same time. Now, I don't expect you to use a calculator and match it perfectly throughout the day, but a good judge is to actually consider, kind of like that story of Goldilocks. Remember that? Goldilocks and the Three Bears? She didn't like the hard bed, the soft bed, but the bed, the baby bed was just right. And I think when it comes to eating, I always tell people to think of that story. It's such a simple way, but you know what? When your stomach is growling, when you feel lightheaded and weak, when you can't focus, instead of thinking about a cup of coffee, maybe think in terms of, hey, how long has it been since I've eaten? Maybe I need some fuel, and give yourself some food. And on the other hand, when you feel stuffed, well, gosh, stop eating, And if you can't do that, work with somebody that can help you with that. Because when you don't fuel enough, you don't feel good. When you fuel too much, you don't feel good. The way to have the most energy is to match those throughout the entire day. So, think about your schedule. Are you going long periods of time without eating? And I know you're in the operating room and maybe you say, well, I don't have time. But many of the people that I spoke with said, you know what? There are other people, maybe they have diabetes, maybe they have low blood sugar, but they find a way to get in food throughout the day. So what can you do? Can you fuel your body better during the day? Now, when it comes to how often to eat, I get this question all the time. What do you think? Is it better to eat 3 meals a day or eating, like 3 meals and 3 snacks? Is that better for you? Well, what do you think? Let me ask you the next question. Do you think snacks would be recommended for somebody who's looking for more energy? Actually, this one is a little bit complicated because the research shows that most people do best with 3 meals a day. Simply because when you introduce more meals, more snacks, people tend to overdo it. And that doesn't affect just their weight. It can affect their energy when they're consuming more calories than their body needs. But there are some individuals who really do best with small, frequent meals throughout the day. One is little kids, simply because they don't have the same type of body stores that we do, and they do better by fueling every 3 hours. And I'm sure you fed your kids that way. Elderly people who can't eat enough at one time do better with small meals throughout the day. Athletes, by far, most people say that they perform better by eating, smaller meals frequently throughout the day. The more active they are, the more calories they burn, and it's hard to eat all that in 3 meals. And so to space it out, whether it's 6 meals, 8 meals, whatever works for them, but athletes do best energy-wise by eating frequently throughout the day. And then there's another group of people that do well by eating small meals frequently throughout the day. And those are individuals who just plain feel better that way. And I have to say, I'm one of those people. I got into the field of nutrition not because of the love of the science, although I love the science, but it was because I had an eating disorder. At the age of 16, I weighed 50 pounds less than I do right now, 50. I was clearly anorexic. And then it morphed into bulimia and binge eating and so forth. And so part of my recovery was to eat frequently, small meals throughout the day. And I found that that worked best for me. I was never hungry. I was never really full, because one of the things about me was when I got full, it was almost like I gave myself permission to eat more, and I was more likely to binge. So some people just do well with eating small, frequent meals a day, but I do not recommend it for everybody across the board. And I've heard this so many times from other people who are saying, increase your energy, eat small, frequent meals. Well, that doesn't work for everyone. So, think about what works best for you. So there you go. I think that gives you kind of a broad overview of how to fuel your body. I did want to share with you one other little bit, because I get this question all the time. People are saying, well, you know what? In order to maintain my weight, I do best if I skip breakfast, eat very little during the day. And maybe you're practicing intermittent fasting where you try to get all the calories within a short little 8-hour period of time. I am not a big fan of that. Maybe it helps you with your weight. I'm not sure if it's a good idea for energy. In fact, I've had people say to me that they are practicing intermittent fasting, and I say, how does it go? How's it going? And they say, well, I've lost weight, but unfortunately, I might lose my wife as well. People talk about their, mood changes. Well, mood changes is what you might observe, but you're also, if you're paying attention, seeing performance deficits as well. Your ability to focus and concentrate and so forth. If you're feeling hungry, you're distracted, you're not going to perform the same way, potentially leading to errors and accidents. So, but people tell me that they do this because they find that they want to burn more fat in the morning. So I'm going to share with you, before we get back into the chat box, I'm going to share with you this short video that I put together, a number of years ago. The audio isn't quite as good as I would like, but I think it illustrates really well why it's important to eat, throughout the day, 3 meals, 5 meals, whatever it takes, rather than condensing all your calories at one time. So take a listen. It does end abruptly, and then I'll be back with you in a couple of minutes.
Hey, all you early morning exercisers. Have you heard about the research that states you'll burn more fat if you exercise first thing in the morning on an empty stomach? Is there any truth to it? Well, actually there is, but don't get excited, because do you know what else you're losing? By the way, it's not good. Let me explain. To understand how this all works, you need to know 3 facts about how the human body works. 1, realize that most of the calories we burn is not from exercise. We burn calories 24/7, even when we're sleeping. 2nd, we need to know about fuel. Just like our cars need fuel to run on, so do we. While cars run mostly on one fuel, gasoline, humans require a blend of fat and a carbohydrate called glucose, about a 50-50 mix. While much of the body is flexible, meaning it can adapt to either burning fat or glucose as a fuel, the brain, nervous system, red blood cells, those cells that carry oxygen throughout our body, must have glucose, and a lot of it. These organs alone require 800 calories of glucose every day. Exercising muscles also burn glucose. So we have a very high glucose need. Now, I bet some of you are thinking, well, can I turn some of this body fat into glucose? Don't we wish? If we could, we'd all be lean. So, 3, on average, the body is burning about 50% of its fuel needs from fat and another 50% from glucose. This is going to fluctuate up and down a little bit, but trust me, we never run on anything close to 100% fat. So again, if we do burn slightly more fat in the morning when you exercise, it just means you're burning a greater percentage of fat, a little bit less glucose. In other words, you don't burn more calories, you just simply change where the calories are coming from. And where do the calories coming from? Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Again, about 50% of our fuel needs come from fat, most of that from our meals and our stored body fat. The carbohydrate in the last meal of the day will provide no more than 2 hours of glucose, even if you ate a large amount of carbs. If your blood glucose stays higher than normal for more than 2 hours, well, you've met the criteria for diabetes. Around 2 hours after that meal, your body starts converting liver glycogen into glucose. Liver glycogen is what sustains our brain in between meals and while we're sleeping. But since our liver only holds 300 to 400 calories worth, not very much, we quickly run out. So to conserve this glycogen, the body starts breaking down our muscles and turning some of those proteins into glucose. By the time you wake up and start thinking about your morning workout, you're running out of liver glycogen and most of your needs are coming from muscle. The longer you go without eating, the more muscle mass you've broken down, and that's not a good thing. For those of you who are thinking, well, don't I have some muscle glycogen? That can't fuel your brain. It can only fuel muscle activity. To conserve muscle mass and increase endurance, have a small snack before your morning workout, somewhere around 100, 150 calories, mostly carbs, like a banana, cup of yogurt, slice of bread.
So what do you think about the video? I mean, this is something that people really don't think about. They don't think about the fuel, the type of fuel that the body uses. And I find the whole thing really fascinating. As I mentioned earlier on in the program, when people think about fatigue or lack of energy, they oftentimes think in terms of not getting enough sleep. And I have to say that definitely is, part of the whole equation about energy. And I found that so many people, nurses included, my mom was a nurse and she said that nurses took care of themselves worse than any other health profession. I don't know, that was her, her words, but, they oftentimes don't get enough sleep. And so often I have people say that they need a lot of caffeine, or I'm a big power napper, and I'll mention that and they'll say, oh my gosh, if I take a nap, I just am conked out. And you know what? Both of those are indicators of, well, you're not getting enough sleep. So let me just give you a quick 4-question quiz to see how well you're sleeping. Because if you're getting enough sleep, you should be able to answer yes to each and every one of these. So go ahead and put in the chat box how many of these you can answer yes to. Like, for example, do you wake up feeling refreshed without an alarm? Can you stay alert in a boring meeting? Or do you tend to drift off? What about after work? Do you have a problem staying awake until bedtime? And lastly, do you sleep the same amount of time on a work day as you do on your day off? Go ahead in the chat box, just tell me how many of those you can answer yes to. And again, if you're getting enough sleep, you should be able to answer yes to each and every one of these. And if you're not getting enough sleep, I think you need to think about how it affects your performance. Studies have shown after we go a certain number of hours without sleep, our performance diminishes to that in which you would see in somebody who had a blood alcohol level of 0.05%. What is that? Is it 12, 18, 24, or 36 hours? In other words, if you stay up that long, 12, 18, 24, 36 hours, would you say that your performance diminishes to that of somebody with a blood alcohol of 0.05%? Go ahead, put your answer in the chat box. Well, it turns out that just 18 hours without sleep affects your performance in such a way that you can perform as if you were impaired. Okay, not legally drunk. That level is when you're awake for 24 hours. And I realize many nurses work long hours and they think they're performing well, but studies have shown that your performance diminishes. I think you need to figure out what works best for you and for your organization, but performance does not stay the same from, hour zero until the 12th hour of your work. It doesn't. And so it's very critical that we get adequate sleep as much as possible and try to limit how long we go without sleep. Another way that's been shown to power up your energy is through movement. And some of you have probably even noticed this. When you're sitting at a desk and you're about to fall asleep and you stand up and walk around, all of a sudden you feel more alert. And so there are so many studies showing now that people perform better when they're, standing instead of sitting, or when they're moving instead of standing, or more importantly, when they're moving from one position to another. In other words, you can get just as groggy, standing the whole time, but it's that up, down movement, what they call micro movements throughout the day can help to power up your energy. And so often in the operating room, I'm certain that many of you are in the same position over again. And maybe it's difficult to increase movement in the operating room. But what about when you're outside the operating room? Do you immediately leave the operating room and sit down and do nothing? Well, if it's for a power nap, maybe that's good. But would it be helpful to get in some micro movements? And not just for energy. People don't realize when you hear the recommendation of getting in 30 to 45 minutes a day of movement, they think they have to get it all at one time. And there's new research showing that even small little bits of exercise at one time can help you to get in your exercise requirement. Would you say that is 1 minute at a time, 10 minutes at a time, or 15 minutes at a time? What do you think? What has the new research shown in terms of how much exercise you can get at one time that counts towards your grand total of what you need to condition your heart? That's right. The answer is just 1 minute. Every minute counts. So ask yourself how you can get in some small micro movements throughout the day. And for those of you who are thinking even bigger, even in terms of, well, how can I get 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at lunch, 10 minutes after work, and bam, I've gotten 30 minutes throughout the day. And then maybe, every hour as much as possible, trying to get in a little bit of movement, walking up and down some stairs, down the hall, whatever fits into your schedule. And it's going to be different for all of you. I understand that. Well, there you go. I wanted to give you just a few quick tips of things you could do, things that have been proven in research studies to help you to power up your energy. Again, not energy just to make you feel better, although that's fun, but also energy to help you to think more clear, help you to focus and concentrate, help you to stay calm and level-headed, help you to manage your stress a little bit better. And many of the things that we talked about, don't have to be all encompassing. In other words, you don't have to change everything that you eat and everything about the way you move your body, but sometimes just making a few small changes in the way you eat, sleep, move, and even in the way you think can affect your energy, can power it up so you can feel better and perform better.